Thank you to everyone for joining BMC today for the November Market Intelligence webinar. Before we begin, I want to start by saying that if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to submit your inquiries using the chat function on the right side of your screen. Only I'll be able to see your questions, and I will be able to submit them to the various speakers during our designated Q&A portion at the end of the segment. Without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to the Senior Vice President of Operations and Supply Chain for BMC, Joe Barnes.
Thank you, Jack. Welcome to BMC's third and final Market Intelligence webinar for 2020. My name is Joe Barnes, and I manage the supply chain and procurement functions here at BMC, and I'm happy to be here with you again. My hope is we provide some valuable insights to you over the past 3 months. While a lot has changed over the past few weeks, our industry continues to demonstrate a path of resilience. As most of you know, home builder confidence hit another record high in November, showing that the current run has some stamina. BMC's job, which we focus on every day, is to ensure our customers have the products and services they need to keep this growth going. It is our hope today that you will gain some new perspective, gather a few ideas to try in your business, and be more informed to ask better questions. I will start off today's presentation with an overall summary, followed by a deep dive on interior doors from Tim Foster. John Osborne will have a brief update. And then lastly, for those of you who have been with us for these webinars the last few times, you know we are blessed to have a really smart economist named Allie Wolf joining us. Allie will share her insights, which has always been very interesting, and close out with an opportunity to ask you questions. Once again, thank you so much for being here. Let's go ahead and get started, Jack. I thought what might be helpful for our audience is to provide some perspective on lead times by product category. Specifically for our customers, I would like to point out some product categories where perhaps you need to ask more questions or be more involved than others, all in vain of ensuring you have the product you need to complete your projects. Understanding lead times for manufacturers is important only that it gives you some insight into where perhaps the dealer network is getting pinched in the current strong demand environment. In many of these cases, BMC is stocking additional inventory or finding alternatives. I'm not going to touch base on all the categories, but more than willing to answer any questions during the Q&A session. Let's talk through the good news first. Good news, your construction hardware, connectors and hangers, good to go. Slightly longer than normal lead times. Lumber availability, as everybody has experienced some normalizing on most products over the last 45 days, caused by the seasonal pullback in the DIY and home center business. The anti-dumping duties and anti-dumping countervailing duties imposed on Canadian producers will lessen in the weeks ahead, but this may not impact products that continue to experience extended lead times like finger jointed studs. While availability has improved thus far in Q4, the next steps for the lumber supply chain will be dictated by the early 2021 demand from the aforementioned DIY and home center segments. Slightly longer lead times. Exterior doors, again, depending on brand and geography. For the most part, we are seeing lead times at a week or slightly more in flush and dry glaze. We are starting to see some pressure on exterior door frames, but I think our team's doing a good job of mitigating those impacts. Fasteners, on the other hand, especially on collated and framing nails, is starting to see some pressure. Finished coil and staples all seem to be on normal lead times. Siding, again, depending on brand and type, is under a lot of pressure, and that category, I would say, is starting to move more towards the extended than normal. On interior doors, obviously not all doors are equal, but in general, your 2 and 5 panel doors are under significant lead time pressure depending on your geography. Flat panel and shaker doors, even more lead time. Stallion and rail doors are going to have better availability in general, and in general, I would say this category is improving, and Tim will get into those details here in a few. Now for some of the categories that are more challenged. Door locks, still running double lead times until our manufacturers get caught up. Again, something you need to plan for. EWP is still under some pressure given the strong demand, although I know those manufacturers are, for the most part, running at full capacity. However, expect lead time in this category, challenges in this category to continue through early 2021. Lastly, on windows, especially vinyl windows on the East Coast, significant lead times. As you move west, those lead times on vinyl get better. Painted vinyl is obviously going to run longer. Your composite and fiberglass are slightly extended, as well as your patio doors. We're not seeing any issues on wood windows. Overall, that should give you some insight into what you want to be out in front of in terms of project planning. Working with your BMC sales representative early in the process will go a long ways in ensuring you have the products you need to complete your projects as well as sustain the growth we're experiencing. Given that, we had a chance to survey our top 100 suppliers in the last few weeks, asking them what do they think and what do they believe we are headed. The first question, which you can see, when do you expect the current product supply chain challenges to get better? As you can see, the results were somewhat mixed. Some categories are going to see some improvement sooner rather than others, and strong demand that carries through the winter will most likely keep the pressure on other categories. And as our suppliers are pointing out, labor on the plant floor is still a challenge in a COVID environment. Bottom line here is expect volatility to continue on product supply. We then ask our suppliers, what is the best action you would recommend to ensure a consistent product supply going forward? As you can see by the responses, it's really a combination of getting out in front of your needs and communicating those sooner rather than later, especially on those more challenged categories. So please work closely with your BMC representative in setting the right priorities and expectations so we can ensure you get the product you need. This wraps up my portion of the presentation. I'll now turn it over to Tim Foster.
Thanks, Joe. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to thank JELD-WEN for sponsoring today's webinar. And we have Derek Brosterhouse from JELD-WEN on the call, and he will be available to answer any more technical interior molded door questions that might come up from my presentation. So I'm Tim Foster. I'm the Director of Millwork Purchasing for BMC. Been in the industry for 35 years, 24 years at BMC. Me and my team handle interior and exterior doors, windows, molding and boards, finished hardware, stair parts, closets, anything that helps make the house look pretty. But today, really want to just spend a couple of minutes doing a deeper dive on molded doors and kind of the door hell that 2020 has been. And, you know, I think everybody on this call that touches home construction has felt the pressure from molded doors this year. And a question I get asked a lot is, you know, molded doors were on allocation to BMC this year for the first time since 2005. And why is that? There's a number of reasons, some of them COVID related that I'll talk about real quickly, but the first one is really molded door skin availability. And in the economic crash of 2007, 2008, 2 molded door plants went out of operation. Those 2 plants produced about 18 million molded door skins or 9 million molded doors per year. That capacity has gone and never been replaced, and for a number of years it didn't matter. But now, as housing starts have rebounded, there is not enough really door skin capacity in the U.S. So this is going to be a longer term issue that we face after COVID is gone. So industry needs to add some more door skins. But the more pressing thing probably has been door assembly labor, whether it's in U.S. plants or Mexican plants. U.S. plants in general, I think almost every single one has had a shutdown, COVID-related shutdown of some length, 1 to 2 weeks in general. The 3 door plants in Mexico that ship into the U.S., Mexican government had month-long shutdowns with some of those plants, extremely disruptive to door supply into the U.S. Another factor has been changing tastes for door styles. Door manufacturers have been excellent at introducing new styles, flat panel shaker styles, like the one shown to the right here. And while those doors are stylish and new, unfortunately, they take a lot more labor to produce. So when you're already dealing with a very limited amount of labor, spending that labor on making many fewer doors has also contributed to our allocation situation. Last factor, really big factor, Unprecedented demand. Everybody expected the box store business and single-family home construction to crash during COVID. Just the opposite. Big box demand during COVID has been up about 35% in the millwork category, and our single-family business has remained extremely strong. So it's been a perfect storm of increased demand at a time when, availability has been way, way down. Last point there, MDI resin shortage. A Gulf Coast storm wiped out a plant that makes resin that goes into about 20% of the door skins used in the U.S. That's has turned out to be not as major an issue as we thought, but it did throw a small kink into things, but that's pretty much worked out now. So, what can BMC and the industry do about this shortage, this allocation going forward? First and foremost, communication and lead time. Those two things are tied hand in hand. Our manufacturers are demanding more lead time from us, and we're asking for more lead time from our customers, more communication. Tell us about your projects. Tell us about what's coming up. The more information we have, the better we can serve you. Along with that, of course, is more inventory. BMC is desperately trying to build as much inventory as possible as a buffer against these issues. It's kind of tough to build the plane as you're flying it, as they say, but as much as possible, BMC is adding lots and lots of inventory. Fourth thing, more flexibility. If your salesperson comes to you and says, hey, I know the store you've picked for this house or project, is what you want, but maybe there's a similar style that is easier to get, is in stock, just consult with your salesperson and, try and give as much flexibility as possible, and that can help us help you. And the last thing, more standardization. BMC is committed. BMC ourselves have multiple specifications on doors between height, width, and bevel. We are committed to driving to one spec for BMC, which will help our manufacturers be much more productive on their throughput of doors. That was fast. That's what I've got. I would like to now introduce John Osborne, BMC's Vice President of National Accounts and ReadyFrame.
All right, thank you, Tim and Joe, for an excellent update on supply chain. I'd like to switch gears a little bit and share some sentiment from our customers and our sales leaders across the U.S. So let's jump right in. So here's what's causing the most disruption from our customers' perspective. You heard from Joe, and windows are our biggest opportunity, followed by lumber and EWP, and then doors and hardware. So we've had a few, write-in votes for truss capacity and lead time issues, that are out there. So, as Tim just mentioned, all of these categories are critical for our success with you, and we're excited to help you solve them. Go to the next slide. So this next question attempted to better understand how our customers are dealing with their sales backlog and getting homes started. We've heard that many builders are waiting for the price of lumber to come down. But the number one answer was really just not enough humans to do the job. The trades, from a trade perspective, and internal staff in all segments of the industry are strained by the increase in business and the processes to just get orders through the system. Permitting is playing a factor in some markets, and communication on expected start times and product needs will be critical so we can get ahead of these product challenges in the coming months. But that was a good perspective. Go to the next question we asked, which is about the size of homes in the U.S. So after so many years of house shrink, which many builders have used to address affordability or really just find more buyers, a majority has said that houses aren't getting smaller anymore. Some say bigger to accommodate work from home. And Allie has a lot more detail on this and may talk some more about why this is and where houses are selling relative to city centers across the U.S. Go to the next slide. I thought it was worthwhile to ask this question. So with so much going on, this final question was about predictions for next year in housing. Consensus among people we surveyed were pretty optimistic for 2021. And with all of the challenge we are facing, less than 10% said it would be slower next year. Over 90% said it would be the same or better. And we really are so grateful. We have to take a minute here to be so grateful for such a strong industry that supports so many families in our company and in the many companies that are in our industry. So shout out to the housing industry. I do want to just give a quick update on our merger status. We did receive Department of Justice approval this week for our company's merger with VFS. We expect this to close late this year or early in 2021. We are really excited for what's to come, and we look forward to growing with you. Before I turn it over to Ali, as an industry, we have plenty of opportunity to improve, to work together, and with capacity strained in so many areas, we need to really think about how we can create some capacity by perhaps streamlining orders, being less reactive, as Tim and Joe mentioned, placing orders sooner just to give visibility on what's coming, communicating what's out in front of us, and maybe securing longer term commitments that keep the supply chain moving and keep our managers and operations people ahead of the manpower that's needed to continue the supply chain. Information and data are our friends. And Ali Wolf from Zonda has a wealth of resources that she has gathered specific for our BMC markets. And we're excited to have her again with us today to hear the latest on our industry. We plan to continue this into 2021 with Ali, and we're grateful that she's taken the time and energy to build some important information for us. So I'm going to turn it over to Ali, and thank you all for joining us today.
Awesome. Thanks, John. And I'm grateful for you and Jack and Janine, Joe, the entire BMC team for allowing me to come back. Now, today's presentation is going to be a lot. So I need you guys to buckle in, get ready to cover a whole bunch of different topics. I honestly didn't think going month to month I would have many things to say. And as I'll show you, there have been very, very big changes that can impact the direction of growth for both the housing market and the economy. So as mentioned, I am Ali Wolf, the chief economist with Zonda. If you're not familiar with us, we're a housing data and consultancy firm. We do custom market studies for builders, developers, private equity, and hedge funds. We also track 275 housing and economic metrics. So in my role as our chief economist, I have to step back and I have to say, okay, what's going on internationally? What's going on nationally? What's going on with policy? What's going on with, job growth? And how does that all translate into what we should be looking at for the housing market? And that's what we're going to hit on today. We're going to start with the backdrop, which of course will include the vaccine and any kind of risks we see in the economy, before we move into housing trends, hit on a couple things that make 2020 unique and what that means for the home building industry. And then of course, I'll finish with our forecasts for next year and some final thoughts. So the place I am happy that I get to start with is some good news. Probably great news is a better way to say it. And we all know where I'm going with this, which is of course the idea that Pfizer and Moderna have now had really promising results on the vaccine front. So as we look at Moderna specifically, what do we know? Well, we know of all of their test subjects, 95 people developed COVID-19 symptoms. 90 of them were on the placebo. Only 5 of them had had the vaccine. And of those 95 that developed the symptoms, 11 of the cases were severe. All 11 of them were on the placebo. This is exactly what we've been looking for since March. And I think this is what has made the year so hard, is we wanted a strong antiviral, or we wanted a vaccine so that we could finally see light at the end of the tunnel. So can we go back to normal yet? Right? This has been a long year. This has been a crazy year. I need to say, no, not just yet. We need to pause and we need to look at what the distribution is going to be like and how quickly it goes out and who gets access to the vaccine first. Okay, so let's look at this. First doses of the vaccine rolling out December, about 30 million, assuming everything goes according to plan, to our first responders and to our healthcare workers. Perfect. That's good news. Going into early next year, find those high-risk individuals that have had to completely change their spending habits, give it to them so that there's more safety and more comfort for them to go out and start living a more normal life. Given the timelines we're hearing, we're not virologists, but we obviously watch the news and we pay attention to all the different headlines that come out. Semblance of normal life now looks 6 to 12 months from where we are today. And this is so rosy and this is so perfect, and we're really happy to see this. But there are a couple hurdles, and let's acknowledge those. The first being, Pew Research has been talking to people since the beginning of the pandemic. And back in May, 72% of individuals said, yeah, I'm going to take the vaccine, either for sure or probably. Fast forward, we're now at 50% of the population that says they will likely take the vaccine. Of that 50, it's only 20% that said for sure they will. Now, it's not a huge problem if not everyone takes it. We don't need all of us to take it for things to go back to normal, but you need enough to stop community spread. So we've got to watch that number very closely, but we also have to look at today. If I'm talking about semblance of normal life 6 to 12 months from now, what's going on right now? Well, our hospitalizations are at the highest level they've ever been, and it's not just one part of the country. We're seeing the hospitalizations per 1 million people up the worst in smaller population areas, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska. But look at your higher population areas. You have Nevada, you have Texas, you have Ohio, where those hospitalizations are going up. Now, I'm sure you guys are interested in what I have to say about it, but I also want to throw in a quote from JP Morgan Chase's CEO, Jamie Dimon. He has a little bit more clout than I do. And as he looks at this data and he looks at the vaccine news, he gave an interview yesterday and said, now is not the time to act like it's over. Let's double down and let's get through COVID the best we can. Because now that we see light at the end of the tunnel, we don't want to let go of everything we've done to the point that 6 months from now, we have an economy that's worse off than where it is today, because that's going to make that growth a little bit harder. So here what you see is just the raging virus triggers new shutdown orders, and the economy now braces for a new wave of pain. Now it's bracing for a new wave of pain at a point that we continue to improve. So I've shown you this graph every time I've come here to talk about what are we seeing in terms of the labor front. Last month when we met, 52% of all the jobs lost have been recovered. This month we're at 54%. This goes back to the idea that we're improving, but the rate of growth is certainly slowing. 638,000 jobs added, putting our headline unemployment rate at 6.9%. We discussed this last month, but I just want to refresh your memory that 6.9% unemployment rate does not include 4 million people who were happily working in February of this year who are no longer working today. Now, these are people that have legitimately left the labor force. They are not looking for a job. Their current situation does not allow them to. So they're not technically unemployed. But we know that that is an extra 4 million people that something's going on with them and they're probably not in the best financial state. Roll that into the unemployment rate and we actually have a 9% level. So not as great as things look on the surface, especially when you look at the long-term unemployed. Now, this becomes important because we have a third of everyone who's unemployed that lost their job in March or April and they have not been able to find another job. They have now exhausted state unemployment insurance and they're on this federal assistance that expires at the end of this year. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The good news in the report is, if you remember, we've talked about permanent job losers and how they were rising at this really unsustainable rate. Well, at least for the month of October, we saw 4 million permanent job losers, almost tied with what we saw in September, down from the 7 million during the height of last cycle. It's not to say that can't go up, but that I think is the best silver lining in this report is we still just have a lot of people on furlough. They haven't permanently lost their job. That's better news for the economic recovery. But as we look at this, we've talked about this in the past, that you have to look at how different markets are doing. And about halfway through the table, you see the US, and the US was that 54% recovered. These are the BMC markets, and I would say I do a lot of these presentations, and I see a lot of the BMC markets that are outperforming the national average. So that's good. That's a really solid footprint. But when you look below the national average at 54%, it doesn't mean Seattle's housing market is crushed or Houston's housing market's crushed. Don't look at the markets that are underperforming the national average as anything more than they have more service sector jobs. Often service sector employees are not going to buy homes anyways. So it's not that those areas are really struggling. The reason I bring up, though, the markets that are underperforming the national average is a little bit later we'll talk about the election and we'll talk about state and local taxes. And any of those that are falling below the national average are more at risk for seeing tax increases on a state or local level in the not too far off future. So we look at this and we kind of start the story really with a mixed message. Our economy is improving and things are getting better, and this is great. At the same time that now hospitalizations are going up, and as much as we've improved the economy, now people are either leaving they're self-selecting themselves out. They don't want to be out and about because they know that that puts them at higher risk. And in some cases, you have state or local governments pulling people back. So light at the end of the tunnel, vaccine, yay, 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 but we got to get through the next 6 to 12 months. So as we look at this, I think one really interesting thing that came up, I did a presentation yesterday, someone said, well, are we getting nervous that now we're reversing the reopening trends and what that means for the housing market? One thing we should learn from what we saw earlier this year is that actually when you see more shutdowns, all that does, at least what we saw this year, is makes people say, I'm going to be in my home a lot more than I was before. And so maybe I didn't move before, but rates are still low and now really feels like a good time to buy. So let's watch that trend, but we believe it will have a similar nesting effect as we go into the winter months. So for housing, I want to show you a whole bunch of data. We're going to show you some survey data from our division presidents, but I want to talk about what we've heard on the street. So the data shows that new home sales, contracts signed, up 47% year over year. And I, as our chief economist, have to step back and I have to look at the data and I have to look at the different market trends, but I'm not expected to know every builder in every market. That's why we have a Dallas expert and an Austin expert and a Raleigh expert. And so once a month I get on a call with them and I say, what are you guys hearing on the ground? What are division presidents or land act teams or the marketing teams? What are they telling you? And the biggest and most common thread, and I know it's not going to surprise anyone, is this idea that contracts are not the problem. Demand is not the problem. But everyone is facing this supply side issue that I'm going to show you at great length a little bit later. And this is not just supply chain. You heard the BMC team talk to you earlier about some of the extended lead times. That's not the only supply problem builders are talking about. And as such, as they see different issues, again, I'll have a whole slew of data to show you later, they are now, in some cases, deliberately slowing their sales or deliberately slowing their releases because they don't want to hit a point that they've sold through everything and then they're sitting there for a few months and they don't have any homes to sell. That's going to be interesting to watch as the data starts to shift to account for that. But they basically say, as we look at the supply picture, we can't keep up as builders and our subs are being stretched too, and it's really just not fair to anyone. And the issue becomes as you go and you say, okay, let's backfill all of the lots that we've sold, permits are now taking 2 to 3 times as long as they did before. And so builders are really struggling with that. If you saw the report that came out yesterday for national permits, permits were far lagging starts. And I think this is truly because our states are overburdened. They've cut hours, they've cut people. The virtual permitting process has become a lot more hard, and that's impacting future growth. But as builders say, their forecasts that I'm going to show you later, I'm going to show you our forecasts and builder forecasts, 100% based on lot supply. It's almost that they don't even look at the demand picture because they know it's there. It's just how much land have they acquired over the past few years and how can they pull that forward? And interestingly, I would say this is the first time I've heard this. We are hearing that there are land acquisition jobs popping up everywhere. It almost doesn't matter where you are or what builder, big builder, small builder, everyone is just hungry and trying to get more analysts on their team to be able to lock down and secure more lots. Interestingly, last time we met, I talked about how I'm a little bit concerned about what's happening with affordability. And on our call, we did our call on Tuesday of this week. On our call, we heard about price ceilings for the first time. So in 2019, basically all of our conversations were price ceiling, price ceiling, price ceiling. We push things too high, people are struggling. Those basically evaporated this entire year. And again, sitting here in November is the first time we've heard some builders in some markets at some price points saying that they think they may have pushed things too far. But a lot of other builders are saying the demographics are undeniable. We're not really concerned about it. We know if you just look at sheer math, there's a lot of demand to be there. But a lot of builders have also had humility, and they're saying, you know, we're not successful because we're geniuses. We're successful because this is a bull market and because we have so many factors working towards us. And I think a lot of them are trying to be aware that you have to still be strategic, even though it's just as easy as put the home and people buy it. They're trying to be a little bit more strategic about what the consumers will want in the next 12 to 18 months as well. When we look at contract sales, this is the first time that I've shown this data where you actually see more builders reporting that their contract sales went down month over month, but it should have been happening months earlier. This is just basic seasonality. This is not something that we are at all calling out as a concern. 38% of builders said there was a slight decrease in activity versus significant decrease. In a normal year, you'd be looking at 70 or 80% of builders saying significant decrease from October to November, in particular in an election year. So that's actually a good outcome. 42% of builders said that their sales remained flat from October to November, so far at least. Now, as we look at the data, again, I wanted to take a look at the BMC markets to see, all right, well, where's the strongest growth? And so I have all of them here listed by the biggest percent change in the average sales rate per community. So in Denver, for example, last year builders were selling 2 sales per month per community. They've doubled that this year at 4 sales per month. Denver is one of the strongest housing markets in the country. Jacksonville as well, you can see a 70% increase, same with Atlanta, same with Sacramento, which is really, really benefiting from this work from home trend that we'll talk a little bit more later about. As you go further down the list, look at Phoenix. Even the markets that have a smaller change are still growing. In a normal year, a 23% increase would be phenomenal. I will tell you, builders did not plan for a 23% increase this year, so that's still really good. But you also have to look at context. Phoenix, look at last year. Builders were already selling 3 sales per month per community. That was already a strong market. That's a different story than what you saw in Denver. Denver was solid last year. It just wasn't as robust as Phoenix. So when you look at this data, you also have to layer in comps. What is the comp compared to last year, and what is that telling you about the overall strength in a market? But like I said, supply chain, very, very frustrating. We have builders tell us about it all the time, but we also are seeing that project counts are just heading on down. Now, I saw this data. My coworker, Nick, pulled it together. He sent it over to me. I was like, there's no way that's right. Look at that graph. This is community count across the country, down 15% year over year. And this goes back to what I mentioned on the webinar last month, which was builders plan for growth this year. They didn't plan for this much growth. As such, they are burning through and selling through some of their communities, even as they're raising prices at a really rapid rate. The extent, though, completely depends on where you are. So again, these are looking at our BMC markets. You see Seattle. Yes, it is a more expensive market, but in Seattle, where builders were building, often was in the suburbs. And for most of last year in 2018, people wanted to be closer to maybe downtown Bellevue or downtown Seattle. Now, because of this work from home trend, we're seeing that people are now absorbing a lot of those new homes that are for sale in the further out locations, resulting in almost a 40% decrease in project count in that market. You can see across the board, I almost feel better when I look at the bottom of this table, San Antonio, Austin, Charlotte, down, between 7 and 8% year over year. Demand has been very, very strong, but you also see that some of the communities, because there's in general more developable land, some of those communities are going to be bigger than when you look at some of the infill opportunities in places like Seattle, Denver, or LA. So you look at this and you say, okay, well, community count's coming down, just go ahead and build more homes. Well, we have our new home lot supply index. This data is through September. And what we see is that lot supply, this is looking at finished vacant lots. These are plots of land that could be started today. So lot supply down 10% on the year, lot prices up 6% on the year. So builders are really frustrated because they're seeing that the lot inventory is going down and then they're trying to replace it, but of course it becomes more expensive. Now this is where it becomes really interesting because as I'm showing you the data, we're talking about, wow, lot inventory is down, community counts going down. It really looks like all of the supply pictures are trending in the wrong direction. And I'll specifically show you what builders are telling us, which is the lack of lots and gapping out of lots is their biggest concern. And yet, we've been doing this builder survey. A lot of you know we've been doing it since March. We talked to 300 division presidents across the country. 74% of builders think that they're going to start the same or more specs next year. So you have 43%, that's your tallest bar, that are saying they're going to do the same amount of specs as they did in 2020 and 2021. You have 31% saying more. So somehow all of these lot challenges and them saying it's their biggest issue, they're somehow figuring out a way to allocate the resources so that they can bring spec homes. Because as what we've seen, spec homes are not a four-letter word like they were during the last cycle. If anything, to have a spec home is good because people want to purchase the home, they want to move in very quickly. On the far right, we added an option to the survey respondents. This one is, we'd like to build more specs, but we're working through backlog and we're having lot challenges, which is stopping us from happening. I was surprised that it's only 18% of builders that are saying that is what could hold them back in terms of building more specs next year. So as we look at this, I talked about how builders are making some deliberate adjustments to not gap out. So you look at the far left, there you have almost 50% of builders that are saying, nope, like we don't really have any issues. We have enough land. We're in a good position. We're going to just keep taking contracts as we usually have. Then you have a little bit more than a third of builders that are saying that they're taking only that specific amount of contract sales. So you got to watch for that. And again, what that means for the data, what that means for growth rate numbers as you go into next year. There was an interesting shift though. I showed you guys on the last webinar, we said to the DPs, okay, what are the key things to watch for 2021? And this is what they told us last month. Building material costs. They were really frustrated with how costs were going up. They were really freaked out about the election, freaked out about affordability, and then again, broken record, talking about lots, talking about land prices. Did the same thing this month, and we actually had some pretty notable shifts. So now, instead of building material costs being the number 5 issue, it's now building material availability. Then you have winter and rising COVID-19 cases, which is why I dedicated that first section to talking about the vaccine and to talking about the hospitalizations, because builders are as aware as anyone else that if you go through a double dip recession, that could cause a little pain in the housing market. Bumped up, used to be number 5, now number 3, we have building material costs, we have land prices, and then again, gapping out and running out of lots. So these have shifted a lot more to things that the builders wish they could control. That all comes down to the supply picture. So as we look at this, we're talking about this absolutely unpredictably good housing market. And 2020 has some interesting things that have driven that. And the first is really this idea that our home has become our focal point. It's our gym, it's our bar, it's our movie theater, and of course, it's our office. And so even as we talk about a vaccine, we still have 6 in 10 managers that said, hey, we didn't allow people to be remote before, now we're going to allow it. And individuals believe that even post-vaccine, 2 to 3 times a week, they're going to continue working at home. This is important because this flexibility to work and live anywhere is the number 1 reason why people say they're moving today. This work from home trend, I would say, is one of the top, if not the reason we have been so successful. And as you look at it and you look at the year that we've been through, so it's been about 8 months since March. And if you look at the timeline of the vaccine, depending on the estimates that you see, let's say we have another 8 months to go. We're halfway through our work from home days, and those work from home days are so important to us in the home building industry. It's funny, I was talking to our CEO, Jeff Myers, who said, you know, all these builders are so proud that their workers are going back to the office. And he said, you got to realize if people go back to the office, we're directly competing with the commercial real estate space right now. We, because people are working from home, are able to benefit. Going back to the office is actually not good for our business. So it's a really interesting dynamic when we watch it at play. But what you see is it's actually impacted where people are purchasing homes. So here we went into our Zonda database and we looked at, all right, where were home sales the strongest last year and where are they the strongest this year? And you can see in places like Chicago, in Dallas, in Las Vegas, in LA, more than 25 miles from the central business district was already the preferred location. You had the highest average sales rate. Maybe people didn't necessarily want to live that far away from downtown, but for supply and attainability reasons, that was the sweet spot. You expand out this list, and now you have a whole bunch of markets that have changed. So Atlanta, Austin, Nashville, San Francisco. You used to have less than 15 miles from the central business district being the top location people wanted to live in. So far this year, now the highest average sales rate moves to that more than 25 miles. So as we look at this, we at least feel validated. Yep, distance creep is certainly real in some markets. And for builders, where do they usually build? That more than 25 miles. So you're seeing a lot of linkage between the markets that have this as their sweet spot and really high average sales rates as well. But it's not the case for every market. And I thought this was really interesting. We pulled up some markets. You don't have many of them, but this year in Baltimore and Columbus and Jacksonville and San Antonio, being actually close to the central business district is where builders are seeing the highest and the best average sales rate. In a lot of cases, that isn't a change. That's where it was most desirable last year, still most desirable this year. But in places like Minneapolis and DC, you've actually seen people move closer to the central business district versus further away as we've been in this crazy COVID and work from home year. 15 to 25 miles. So this I would really call the place people want to live. So you're in a close-in suburb, but your drive isn't that far. It's probably more reasonably priced than what we're seeing in that less than 15 miles. These are all the markets from Cincinnati to Houston to San Jose and Raleigh, where 15 to 25 miles is where builders are having the most success. And there actually has been change. Interestingly, you see Cincinnati and Riverside have gone from less than 15 miles to 15-25. So yes, people are moving further away. But also in Denver and Portland and Raleigh and San Jose, more than 25 was the top spot. Now it's 15 to 25. So I think as you look at this, you may think about, well, what's offered in the 15 to 25 and have mortgage rates and have increased savings enable people to now move into where they probably would have wanted to purchase to begin with. So interesting to see the work from home, huge and very, very important for us in the home building industry. But I also wanted to touch on the election. Now, I know this is a sticky subject and I'm going to keep it very high level, but enough to let you know what it means for housing and what it means for the economy. 5 different ways I want to address this. I want to look at the stock market. I want to look at the virus. Let's talk about stimulus, taxes, and housing. So there's still some uncertainty, but the way we're able to give you any kind of conclusions is acknowledge Joe Biden as the president-elect and that our Senate is still up for grabs January 5th. That is when we are going to watch if we have a blue wave or if we have a divided government. So like I said, the first thing I want to hit on is the stock market. And as you look at the stock market, that was something that I was nervous about because investors are looking at the outcomes and they're trying to say, what does this mean for growth? What does this mean for earnings? And are we going to be able to maintain some of this momentum under a new administration? So right away on Monday, after we heard the different news and networks announce it was President-elect Joe Biden, stock market rallied. I believe they rallied because they believe it's going to be a divided government. So they like the idea of status quo with maybe a little bit of a growth push moving forward. So that to me was huge. We needed to overcome that to then be able to move forward. Then you look at the virus. Zonda owns Builder Magazine. Some of you probably know Builder Magazine. I wrote a piece for it and I had said that it's likely we'll have a national mask mandate. I was wrong on that. So what we've seen from the president-elect Joe Biden, we've seen his team come out and say federal buildings will have a national mask mandate across the country, but then they're going to work with the governors and have them decide what makes sense given their case counts. And right now, I don't think it'll be that big of a shift because we already have 35 states that do have a national mask mandate. One interesting thing that I think all of us should be happy about after I say it is a lot of you probably saw the headlines last week that there's this gentleman that is on the transition team that came out and said, I believe the best thing for the economy is to do a 4 to 6 week shutdown. And that freaked everyone out, freaked me out. We're all like, oh no, we don't want to have that. Well, turns out this guy is one of 12 on the transition team related to the virus. He is not the end all be all. On Monday, Joe Biden comes out and says, we're not doing a national shutdown. So it was good that he finally addressed that and said, hey, I know that's what we're hearing, but that's not actually reality. Stimulus. The stimulus becomes one of the most frustrating things to me, because if we're talking about an economy that is recovering even at a slowing pace, our elected officials are playing with fire. We have 11 legislative days left this year, and we do not have even a skinny stimulus deal signed. Come December, between 12 and 15 million people will have zero money coming in, nothing. They're not working, nothing from the state, nothing from the federal government, nothing. So if we think we can maintain this momentum when people have lost their incomes completely, we're kidding ourselves. So the stimulus, I think, it actually is like literally making me hot right now. I'm getting frustrated thinking about it, because this is what we can do to maintain growth. Also, at the end of this year, we will lose the student loan deferral. That has been really big for housing. The fact that people haven't had to pay their student loans this year, it's getting tacked on to the life of the loan, and people have been able to use that to save money to put it towards housing. And that eviction moratorium, which was very, very important to ensuring people didn't lose their homes and didn't lose their, didn't get moved out of their apartment. That becomes up for grabs at the end of this year. And as you look at it, I think the hardest thing is you look at the economy in aggregate, and yeah, we're growing. And you can see that in retail sales. We have online activity, we have building supplies, we have sporting goods. These sections are absolutely thriving. But you can't leave those categories on the right, the electronics, the clothing, the gas stations, the restaurant and bars, the travel and tourism, without anything at the end of the year. So that, I would say, beyond the vaccine, is the one thing we have to watch over the next month or two. Moving on to taxes. I know taxes are also another thing that get people very worked up, but the way I want to tackle this is, I mentioned earlier about Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, his interview yesterday. And what he basically came out and said is, we increase spending. We are kidding ourselves that we increase spending and we don't have to increase taxes. Like, you have to pay for that at some point. But his argument was, be smart, talk to economists, figure out what tax increases you can do without crushing the economy. Some of them will be okay, some of them will limit growth. And so as we look at that, his example was, look at the highest net worth people, like Jamie Dimon himself. He's like, tax me, the economy's still gonna grow, I'm not gonna hold it back. But as we look at that tax on the 400,000 plus income, or the higher corporate taxes, I think you'll expect to see the top bullet for sure if the Senate runoff becomes a blue wave. That is what President-elect Joe Biden said on the campaign trail, so it shouldn't surprise anyone there. It becomes very limited if we have a divided government. Same with the higher corporate tax rates. You've seen Mitt Romney come out and say he agrees that some corporate tax increases should be done, but under divided government, that should be limited as well. For housing specifically, we may see the return of the increase in the state and local tax allowance on our tax forms. And that's important because in places like California and New York and Connecticut, the lowered SALT cap has then impacted the ability for people to write off their mortgage interest deduction, which was a little bit of a hit to the local housing market. So that could get reversed. But I think most importantly, as we look at this, if you go on the housing section of the transition team, I feel like no one has read this. So when you look at it, the team is at least hoping to do an up to $15,000 first-time buyer credit. And this is big for the housing market, especially in a time that affordability is becoming more of an issue. Yes, people are saving more, but this would be awesome. This would be really good for capital constrained buyers that can afford the monthly payment, but they can't afford the down payment, or they can't afford some of the closing costs. So I would say fairly neutral on the election, almost more status quo, in particular if we get a divided government, January 5th, the date to watch. Final things I want to hit on here, starting with our forecasts. Now, as we look at our forecast, we are calling for a 13% increase in single family housing starts in 2021 over 2020. Now, I will show you in a moment one of the reasons why we are calling for more growth in starts than sales. And I'll also show you what builders have told you or have told us that they're putting in their business plan. So 13% increase from us. National Association of Home Builders, in case you're curious, they're calling for a 2% increase. So we're a lot more positive than them, but Fannie Mae is a little bit more positive than us, calling for a 15% increase. Now, the reason we are saying a 13% rise is partly because of what we've talked about before, which is this idea that contract sales are far exceeding starts. We have a whole bunch of homes that are sold, a contract is signed, but they've yet to be built. We know builders are entering 2021 with a really strong backlog, and housing starts, we believe, simply will need to rise just to meet the demand of these crazy increases and awesome increases that we've experienced so far this year. When you talk to builders, so we said 13%, we're in line with about a third of builders that said they expect starts to be up more than 10% compared to 2020. Your next highest answer, almost another third, you have builders, 26% that are saying they expect starts to be roughly the same compared to 2020. And then the rest really falls within up between 1 and 10%. So you see overall builders are definitely expecting starts to go up. Only 8% of them are saying down at all. When you look at sales, like I said, our starts forecast is a little bit more positive than our sales forecast, mostly because of the supply issues. And we're calling for a 1.5% increase. Look at the graph though, this is not bad news that it's not rapid growth. We're still saying that sales are going to be at the highest level since 2006. We're just not calling for next year to replicate the kind of insane activity that we saw so far this year. We are in line more or less with the National Association of Home Builders that's calling for sales to be flat, and then Fannie Mae, who is calling for a 3% increase. Now, this is where it's interesting, is we, Zonda and the NHB and Fannie Mae, are basing a lot of this on some of those supply stats that I showed you earlier about lots and community count going down. Builders are seeing a little bit of a different story. So you probably should trust them over us in terms of what they have on the ground, because like I said, their forecasts are 100% based on what they're seeing in the lot environment. We have 26% of builders that are saying they expect sales to be roughly the same. So again, that's in line with what we're saying. But then you have 50% of builders that expect sales to be up year over year, with 20% of those that expect it to be up more than 10%. So it will depend on location. We have a regional director in Dallas that said some builders are having a push goal of having a 60% increase in sales in 2021 over 2020. So it depends on the builder, depends on their lot positioning and all of that. But you can see pretty consistently an increase in sales is expected for next year. So my last two slides here, as we look at the risks to the growth. I often will show you a lot of the good news, and I don't want to leave you thinking everything is fine. There are still some risks that we are going to be monitoring closely. Shadow inventory, this is something that every single presentation I'm on, someone asks about shadow inventory. Yes, this is a risk. Yes, this could increase supply on the market next year that a lot of people haven't planned for. So watch for any kind of shadow inventory as people try to offload their homes to avoid a foreclosure. Of course, housing affordability, and the question every single builder talks to us about is, have we just pulled demand forward? On the economic side, I think I've laid out a pretty strong case that there are some risks with light at the end of the tunnel. So just watch for a double dip recession, watch for the stimulus to run out, or watch for any kind of delay in the implementation of getting the vaccine out there. I have no insider knowledge on that. It's just something that as I look around as a risk, that poses one of the threats. But as we've talked about before, housing has so many things going for it. We have interest rates in our favor. We have fear of missing out in our favor. We have work from home in our favor, the stock market, high home prices. And the idea that going into this year, everyone was enthusiastic about the millennial buyer, but little did we know the Gen Xers were going to come out in full force, and then the boomers, which have been slower to rebound, still have some demand to work through the rest of this year and even into next year. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to John to see if we have any questions.
Awesome job, Ellie. Thank you so much. Jack, what do we have on tap?
Sure, yes. Thank you so much, Ellie. Tremendous job as always. So the first question we had is going to be for Tim. As you view the interior door issues, what is the alternatives for builders? And also, which interior door styles do you think will be the easiest to get over the next year?
Well, in answer to the first question, what are some of the alternatives for builders? We've had an existing program in Houston that we're doing in some other markets, going to be expanding on, and that is solid style and rail doors in the shaker designs. Once you start getting up to those price points, there's better availability. I think that actually helps our molded door manufacturing partners by taking some of that demand away. So builders should consider solid style and rail options for shaker designs. That's one thing. The second question, what are designs that are best available? All designs are going to be available. It's just what's easiest. And I'll probably get shot for saying this, but the easiest design to get is still traditional six-panel molded doors. It's kind of there are import skin options available that manufacturers are using in I don't want to say unlimited quantities, but much better quantities. I realize that six-panel doors are not the most popular option today, but the answer to the question is they are very readily available. I think the takeaway is demand planning and communication are the most important things to help builders with their needs.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tim. Another question we have, I'm going to pose it to Ali, but really feel free any of our speakers to ask is just any sort of comments on the remodeling industry and that market at this time.
Yep. So when you look at the remodeling industry, I think one of the biggest things going for it is the amount of people that have refinanced their existing mortgages. And in a lot of cases, when you refi, you're more likely to stay put. You're going to want to invest in your home. You're going to want to make it more catered to your lifestyle. So what we saw is a lot of the outdoor remodeling earlier this year when we were looking at spring and people were spending more time outside. As we go into winter with these shutdowns, as frustrating as they are, it also enforces this idea that people are going to be home more and they may see more remodeling done, maybe some of the stuff inside, but of course we still have to have people feel comfortable having trades inside to be able to work through any kind of bigger indoor remodels.
Good job, Ali. How about any more questions, Jack?
That's all the questions I've received at this point. So if you have anything, John, we got one more. Ali, prediction. What is your prediction for interest rates? Do you foresee those going up in 2021?
Ooh, I love this question. I love it because there's not actually a great answer, but I will tell you what we know so far. So when you look at interest rates, what you have to remember is that what's good for the economy is not necessarily good for the housing market. And the reason I say that is because the Federal Reserve has come out and they've said, hey, we're going to keep short-term rates low. And everyone that doesn't follow the Fed as closely as I do, they think, oh, great, mortgage rates are going to be low. Well, the Fed is not controlling mortgage rates. The Fed is controlling short-term interbank lending. The 10-year Treasury is ultimately what determines the 30-year fixed rate mortgage, which of course the Fed can influence. So it's not that they are not influencing the mortgage market. It's just not that they're directly changing it. With that being said, when we got the vaccine news, investors go, this is awesome. Investors are looking at the future. They're saying there's going to be growth. Maybe there's going to be inflation, but for sure the economy is going to start coming back. They exit the bond market. When they do that, that pushes the yield up. When the 10-year Treasury yield goes up, mortgage rates go up. So we have had the 10-year Treasury get to the highest level we've seen since the start of the pandemic, which corresponds with about a 3 to 3.3% interest rate. One thing to note, though, is the Federal Reserve is really aware that housing and auto sales are two of the reasons the economy is doing well. So if the Federal Reserve sees that that 10-year Treasury is going up and that mortgage rates are going up, they're going to step in, maybe re-release Operation Twist, where they buy more of those longer dated bonds. In doing so, they push the rates down. So my forecast for 2021 is that they are going to stay low, though I think we start to get a 3 handle back versus being under 3%. I think we would start to see towards the end of the year, not the beginning of next year, towards the end of next year, we start to see rates go towards, again, maybe a 3.2, 3.3, 3.4%.
Awesome job. Awesome job. Well, hey, listen, everyone, thank you so much for being here. Allie, thank you so much again for your great insights. My phone has been dinging away, telling me how great you are. It doesn't say how great I was, so I'm glad you're here, and we look forward to having you again next year, and wish everyone a happy holidays and a great closeout to 2020, and we look forward to being with you again sometime soon.